okay, let's talk about something super hardcore like EVE Online. Then I find a lot of people kind of doing mid-core and kind of a bunch of stuff. So a little bit different of an audience, but I'm sure you will still learn a lot from our stories from EVE. We certainly have learned a lot. So a little bit about CCP. So this is kind of us. We're founding 97 in Iceland. So this year we will become 20 years old, which is quite a feat in this industry of ours to make it that long. And now we have spread out across the world. We have offices in Atlanta, in America. We have an office in Shanghai. We have an office in Newcastle. And then most recently, we opened up an office last fall in London, where I'm based. So we're privately held, and we have about 350 employees in these locations. So surviving for 20 years in the game industry means a lot of ups and downs. So we started 97 in Iceland. Actually, the first product of the company was a family board game made out of paper, shipped to Icelandic households. We sold 10,000 copies. There were only 80,000 homes in Iceland at the time. Very good market penetration. That ultimately became kind of a bit of a tracer bullet for what our games then are about. They're a lot more about people playing the game, rather than playing the game itself. So we kind of go from getting a bit of seed capital from that into a frantic pace of 3 years to make EVE Online. The usual stuff, working 400-hour weeks. Yes, you can actually, 400-hour months, you can actually not work 400-hour weeks, not even us, but you can work 400 hours in a month. And sleeping on the floor, eating cold pizza, and all that good stuff. And somehow we managed to push out EVE Online in 2003, which was then kind of entering into the MMO wave. Dean was actually talking a little bit about that, and Austin and all that earlier on. Then we enjoy a very successful period where we're basically chasing EVE Online that outgrew any of our wildest expectations, and we're kind of just chasing its own success, which then turned into an interesting period following that, where we thought we could do anything because we had done the impossible once, so no, why not do it again? So the company expanded very rapidly here in the 5 years to follow. We grew up to be 640 employees. We had big, massive Uber MMOs in production, which all came crumbling down kind of during this period, and it wasn't really until kind of 2015, I would say, when we properly had come to our own and realized a new foundation, which we now have been springboarding from now in 16 and into 17. And a lot of that kind of new strategy involves around EVE Online, which we're still making bold changes to, and then we have invested quite a bit in VR. So this is the mission of the company. To make virtual worlds more meaningful than real life. That felt pretty hardcore when we wrote it down. And the company has been in a bit of a conflict with this statement. We have various kind of softer ways to talk about this, making virtual worlds where people have the highlights of their lives or peak experiences and all that. I kind of like this one. It's the most primitive one. It's the most provocative. And that kind of speaks to our hardcoreness. And a lot of what we do, this included, is inspired from EVE Online. What EVE Online has become based on what we thought it would be, and we continue to discover that again and again. And what we've ultimately found out is that EVE Online is a game about emotions. It's basically an emotional ecosystem. People pour in a lot of their own passion and feelings into a server cluster that takes that in and kind of regurgitate and then rebroadcasts that out, and ultimately that is really the value proposition of EVE. We really just kind of make the system that facilitates all of that happening, and I've just kind of taken out the word cloud, which we collected out of a bit of a crowdsourcing effort we did to kind of collect all the stories out of EVE Online, where these were the key words that came out. It's a lot of emotional, powerful words. And I have this one story I've used as a kind of a mechanic to explain to people what really goes on in Eve, because it's often really hard to relate to what really goes on there. And it's a story from actually the first 6 months of Eve, which obviously happened 14 years ago, so it's ancient history by now in Eve standards. So I have here a bit of a star map for Eve. So basically the way Eve works, and especially in the beginning, is that there were 5,000 solar systems. They were organized in a very kind of meticulous schema, where we optimized for corridors and choke points and strategic elements of the kind of the fabric or the map of the game. So here in the center, the world is controlled by AI police. So if you want to shoot on other players in the center, then the AI police comes in and interferes. It was very important for us that in the game you could basically do whatever, but you just have to bear the consequences of what you do. So instead of what we could have done, just disable the guns in the safe zones, then we chose to go through the elaboration of making AI control police that goes and interferes, rather than, as we call it, cheat it and just disable the guns. So our thesis in the beginning was that people would kind of start here in the center, and then they would go and attack the AI-controlled pirates, which were here in the outer regions. And we kind of calculated, okay, it will take them 3 months to build the first battleships, then 3 months to go and clear out the region, so probably about half a year of content. Turned out to be wrong. People are way better at playing games than you ever think. So immediately that happened, just day one. And it was actually interesting to follow Eve there in the beginning, because a lot of what happens is that people quickly figured out the game is better with my friends, not only because I like my friends, but because I can trust my friends. So very early on, like, trust became an extremely valuable currency in EVE Online. And all the stories you now read in EVE Online about all the corporate heists and about all the fleet fights and all that, you can usually trace them down to some issue relating to trust that spawns all of that. So due to this element of people pulling in their friends, the game was very geographically polarized in the beginning. So kind of in the first days of Eve, or first months, then we actually had a large Russian alliance, which had taken this up here. Here we had kind of a lot of people from Scandinavia and Iceland. Here we had people from kind of Germany, France, Benelux. And up here we had a lot of Americans that kind of owned the north. And it was very interesting to follow the Russians. The game is very popular in Russia. There's something about, I don't know, space and world domination that has some inherent resonance. And also, because we didn't have Unicode support, then the Russian players, they had hacked the game so they can speak with Russian font, with Cyrillic, which basically meant that while they could be super efficient at communicating amongst themselves, they couldn't really talk to anyone else. It just, you had triangles and gibberish and stuff, and nothing makes sense. So really, the only language that the Russians has was violence. And they tend to talk a lot with the Scandinavians here next door with violence. There was a massive campaign of the Russians to take the region away from the Scandinavians. And the Russians, they didn't really figure out why is it not working? Why are we not beating back the Scandinavians? We have the numbers, we're way better at the game, we have like thousands of years preparing for space and world domination, and we're not winning. What's going on? And it wasn't really until they figured out that it was really the Americans which were secretly funding the Scandinavians. So there were like huge, massive spaceship lines of like guns and ammunition and spaceships that came from the north down to the south. The Americans were all the ones saying, we're just a peaceful manufacturing nation. We don't want it in this war business. Guns don't kill people, people do, la 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 la. Very interesting role reversal between the Swedes and the Americans. But it wasn't really until the Russians convinced the French to go and attack the Americans, break the supply line, that they were able to have a momentary victory over the Scandinavians and take away their territory. So this is something that happens kind of in the first 6 months of EVE Online. At that point in time, we had 30,000 people playing the game, which was mind-bogglingly big to us at the time. Obviously, later, we have now, I think, Now, once we've gone on open access, we're veering in on 500,000 players which are playing the game, which is a lot for a company founded in Iceland where there are only 300,000 people. So if there's a scorecard for companies that have made services bigger than the country, then it's us, Facebook, Tencent, something like that. But what's important on that is that this happened while we were kind of busy fixing all the things, making sure the servers weren't crashing, all that. None of this massive narrative we created. And it actually took us years to figure out actually what happened during those 6 months. And if you were EVE players, you would always be standing up and protesting this version of the history because nobody agrees on this. People, when I tell this story and there are EVE players in the audience, no, Hilmar, it wasn't like that. That, like, Mo there was like a counter-espionage, and he did this and this and this. Like, whoa, okay. I have the database of all the spaceships. I can count all the bullets. But interestingly enough, we still can't really definitively say what happens in those early years because it was completely owned by the players. So this was their own creation. This were their own plans. This were their own strive. This was their own war. This was their own world domination, not ours. And when you have that kind of freedom and autonomy and ownership of what you do, it's amazing what can happen. Here's a picture of me playing EVE at the time, just to put things in perspective. You can see it kind of with the monitor, really how old the game is. This is my newborn daughter. She was born in the same year as EVE. It's pretty hardcore. I'm mining to pay for a spaceship I lost in the game. It's a long story. Won't bore you with that. But doing this is really hard. That's one of the downsides of making games which are very hardcore like EVE. EVE might be the most hardcore game in the world if it weren't for Dwarf Fortress, which probably is that. And doing it is quite hard. And we have done kind of a lot of mistakes in that. This is an artist interpretation of the new player onboarding of EVE kind of during a period of time. It's actually gotten a lot better. Like, encourage you to try. It's we now have like more like a ski lift up to the top where you can take a bit of shortcut. But we have done a lot of mistakes while doing this. And at some point, we were kind of trying to learn what to do when it comes to the business model of the game and where to take it next. And I think we were kind of rushing into things. So we started to add virtual goods in the game. Very famously started selling $60 monocles. There were riots in EVE Online. This is a picture of a riot. 3,000 people occupied this one statue in Jeddah, one of the main hubs. It actually reminded me quite a bit of like Occupy Wall Street, and having previously watched the Icelandic economy kind of erupt with protests and whatnot, then it was kind of easy to relate to why people are protesting. And we actually learned quite a bit from that. And we even left, if you now go to Jeddah and look at the statue, it's now broken. And there is some very poetic description of what goes on. So it's already, our mistakes in developing the game have become a fabric of the universe. This is now something you frequently see. Mainstream media reports on war in EVE Online as if they were wars in reality. You can read in BBC, CNN about spaceship wars. It's pretty phenomenal to think about it, really, the abstraction of mainstream media writing about space wars happening 20,000 years from now, just as if they're actual war in reality. Ultimately, our dream is to take all the wars from reality and just have them happen in EVE. It's one of the goals. So, most recently, actually in November, we took a made a very courageous change, I would say. We did another change to the business model. We've actually done a few changes since the riots, and we've done them a lot better than we did then. And this was a very successful one. So we basically introduced a new kind of open access way to play EVE Online. So now you can start playing EVE Online, and it's completely free, and you can play it for the next decades completely for free. And obviously, because we were mandatory subscription before, we were very worried that we would lose kind of the core business of people subscribing to the game. But the transition has been very successful. Now we basically split EVE players based on kind of clone grades. So you can be an alpha clone or an omega clone. And actually you see in the transition, we were actually able to grow the people that actually played subscription rather than what we feared of our current subscribers would downgrade. And you see here, basically, during kind of the height of kind of the PR campaign around it, there was mostly PR, there's a bit of marketing in here. We were able to double the daily active users of the game, which I think is pretty phenomenal to do on its closing in on its 14th year birthday. And now we're kind of reaching more of a steady state. We're actually figuring out how this kind of new world order works, so we haven't really been pushing it a lot with marketing. And obviously there's the new player experience and everything about the game has to be kind of slowly adopted to this new reality. But here we see actually in this phenomenal opportunity to take the game into whole new heights, which is quite amazing given that, well, I personally have been working on this game directly and indirectly for 17 years. So we're really excited about that. Also, what we have been kind of saying, we've started kind of saying it in the beginning, that EVE is for real. We're actually doing kind of real science inside the game. So what you see here is a little mini game inside EVE Online, where you can do pattern matching to identify images which are from a database from a Swiss company we work with. So you can identify abnormal behavior in human biology. And if you do a good job here, you get actually paid in the money of the game. So basically we have EVE players making actual medical research that might even lead to advances in curing cancer. And people get paid for it with the money out of the economy, which they value quite a bit, and they value doing this also. I think that's a pretty phenomenal example of using the brain powers of gamers, not only to solve social puzzles and political intrigue in EVE Online, but also to make advances in real worlds. Here are some pictures from our fan event. So every year we hold what we call the EVE Fan Fest in Iceland, where about 2,000 people fly every year to come and learn about what's going on in EVE Online, what they are doing in EVE Online, meeting their friends and enemies, and kind of duking it out. At some point, we had the crazy idea of like, we should have a tattoo booth, and maybe somebody gets a tattoo. And we thought like one person will get a tattoo. Obviously, we underestimated, again, everything about the EVE players. There was a massive line to the tattoo booth, and it's been buzzing ever since. I had this very interesting moment. You see me here. Here I am marrying people, 2 EVE players. I obviously have no license to marry people, but they asked really politely if we would, and just felt wrong not to do it. So we had a wedding ceremony during FanFest, which we very much kind of, I asked the girl, is this really what you want? I see like he sold on it, but really, is this? And she really wanted it, and they loved it. As I was marrying them, and the tattoo needle in the booth downstairs was buzzing at the middle of FanFest in Reykjavik with 2,000 people coming to Iceland specifically for this game. And I was like, wow, that's pretty hardcore. And obviously, there's a lot of amazing things that goes on. Most recently, our users have been kind of inventing cosplay in EVE. There's not a lot of character act or sort of heroes from the backstory, but people are inventing this and making this on their own. Here are pictures from our TV set. And really what we look at our users, we look more of them as co-creators than really just players. Really, this game is as much theirs as it is ours. Sometimes people ask me, Hilmar, how is it to be a god of a universe? And I say, well, I don't know about that, but I know what it is to be a janitor. So we look at our roles to kind of make sure that the light bulbs are working and plus the toilet when the partying is too hard. Because it's really about our users and what they do, and they constantly inspire us to go on this journey for ever and ever. And they also inspire us in different ways. So here's a an EVE player, and what should we say, he has like a typical gamer's physique. He actually didn't like that, so this was his character in game. So he went for a whole body transformation of like diet and exercise to be more like his alter ego in the game. So his game character inspired like real concrete life change. This is the Mitani. He's probably the most famous EVE player or the most notorious. When he comes to FanFest, he has more press than I. Like people are interviewing him, getting autographs and all that. I think that's a pretty good KPI for your game if your players are more famous and coveted by universal press than you are. Pretty happy about that. This guy ran a year-long social infiltration called the Guiding Hands Social Club. I encourage you to look that up online. It was a very long story written in PC Gamer more than 10 years ago about that. It's quite amazing. Yes, the tattoos. So this is the crowdsourcing effort we did. We collected 5,000 stories similar to the one I talked about in the beginning. That's where the word cloud comes from. And hopefully you now understand more how all these words can come out of our players once you have seen what can go on in the game. Here's another amazing creation called Empires of Eve by Andrew Groen. So this guy ran a Kickstarter, collected over $100,000 to write a history book about the war, one particular war in EVE Online. So not the war I talked about that predates this war, but this kind of was kind of the second big war to follow that war. So I encourage you to buy that book. It's amazing. It's a kind of a piece of gamer culture and phenomenal to read. Lately, then we've gone quite a bit into virtual reality. I could make a whole new talk about that. So EVE Online just wasn't hardcore enough. So now we're going into VR. And I'll maybe share a bit about that later. But that was my bit. Thank you.
And we have time for some questions. Yes.
Hi, my name is Sebastian. My company is called Jovian Industries.
Okay.
I've been playing EVE Online since 2003 until probably 2009. Also as a press, but as a games press. And I was super inspired by everything that happened there. I've been following very close. And while all the nations were fighting that war, there was a part of us who were just parenting on their interests. So it was quite interesting. Yep. My question is, how many skill points you have?
How many skill points do I have? So, yeah, I have a few characters. Mostly they just train skill points now. They aren't really actively training. I think, it's kind of embarrassing. My top skill character is like 60 million skill points.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah, I know. It's embarrassing.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Yes.
Do you have an EVE tattoo?
I do not have any tattoo, no.
Any more? Yes.
Hello. What do you think about Star Citizen?
About Star Citizen? I hope it works out. We would love to have more space games. It's often been really just been alone in the genre. So I think more space game is a good thing. I hope it works out.
So it seems, one of the keys to EVE that you're communicating here is you really just let the players create their own sense of engagement, which I think, particularly for a lot of casual games, runs contrary to how a lot of people think about keeping their players. I mean, is this something you think could apply to casual games? Something like Minecraft, I think, is another example of a game that lets players create their own sense of wanting to stay.
I think it absolutely can be applied across the spectrum from casual to hardcore. It's a very tricky balance, what you put in the kind of game mechanics, what you put into user innovation. And Minecraft is a fantastic example of having taken a very different route from EVE. Minecraft being a lot about kind of artistic expression and achievements in survival mode, whereas EVE is a lot about the economy and the enormity of things. And I think you can kind of slide a scale across these experiences. I think it's actually what we think a lot about. How can we take kind of the magic out of EVE and make it in a way more accessible in different products, which might either be kind of happening in the EVE IP or something completely different, because there is kind of a true essence there, which is kind of raw and chaotic and unstructured, because the game was created at a time where we just frankly knew less about a lot of stuff. Now we know a lot more about things. So we think a lot about how can we capture that magic, maybe without taking it to the extreme that EVE is, because we already have that, and we'll nurture that and keep going. Is there a way to maybe distill that in a little more simple, more accessible way? Even if I don't think we would do something that would be called casual. I don't think it's our DNA, but I think it can absolutely be applied. Okay.
Well, thank you very much.